Vegetarian foods have been great on a soft food diet since I had jaw surgery 2.5 years ago. I'm going to do a half cup of navy beans, and as I pour them into the Instant Pot, I'm going to be sorting through them to look for any beans that might be bad or have spots on them that look a little bit weird. This one's gray, that doesn't seem right. That one's also gray. Also, if you find a bean that's been cut in half, and you're also looking for any rocks that you might, there it is, that might be in the beans. I put the water about an inch above the beans just to make sure they're completely covered, and I'm going to drain them and rinse them at the end, so if I put in too much water, it's not a big deal. You also want to start carrots and maybe even celery. I'm using celery that I canned, so it's really soft. You can also use celery that was frozen, and then when you defrost it, it's not crunchy anymore, it's soft. But because carrots take a long time to cook, we're gonna cook them ahead of time before we add them to the sauce. It's called parboiling. And to help give myself a little bit of advantage, I'm gonna also cut them up very small. If you're worried about these vegetables not getting soft enough, you can also just blitz them in a food processor until the pieces are about the size of a Tic Tac. And then once they're that size, if you have ever looked at your food when you chewed it before you swallow it, the size of a Tic Tac is going to go down very easily. So that's what I aim for if I'm using a chopper or a food processor to make things smaller, so that I can make sure to have a lot of vegetables in the foods that I'm eating. I'm also going to use peas. They're going to be frozen peas, but I'm going to have them sitting in hot water while these guys are parboiling. It'll get them soft, hopefully not mushy, but even if they do get to be mushy, that doesn't bother me at all because I need stuff to be mushy. I get to use two little guys from the garden. I'm cutting them to be about the width of a pinky nail, or half an inch. And then I'm going to do the same long ways. And then I'll cut these probably a little less than half an inch. So in total, it's about the size of two Tic Tacs put together. I'll have maybe 3/4 of a cup of carrots. Maybe a full cup. And then I'll have this cooking the entire time that the Instant Pot is going. So hopefully by the time I put them in with the gravy, they'll be really soft. And if not, I'll just cook them longer. Then I'm gonna cut up the rest of the vegetables. A full onion. It says it needs 2 tablespoons of garlic, so I have 3 big cloves and 6 ounces of mushrooms. These 4 large mushrooms are about 5.5 ounces, so I can add another one in later if I feel like it. When I cut onions, if you look at one side of the onion, there's little hairs on top like a head, and then the bottom, sort of like the feet, I cut between the head and the feet. I cut the feet part off completely. I leave the part on top with the hair and the head, and then I cut lines down following the lines of the onion So I don't cut through the hair, I cut all the way down the middle, and I'm gonna do a line every ½ inch or so, all the way down. Once you've cut the lines down long ways, then cut across, and you'll get even small pieces of onion. I'm going to cut off the very bottom of the mushroom that's slightly discolored. So I'm going to cut it in half again, and then do really thin slices. Pinky fingernail or less. So I'm going to make the gravy a little bit different than the recipes that I looked at. They recommend, yes baby, they recommend using 6 ounces of butter, which is 12 tablespoons, and that seems a little excessive, so I'm just going to use 1 stick, which is 8 tablespoons. And then another thing that they do is they start by cooking the butter, and then they add the onions in to cook in the butter. Meanwhile, cooking in a separate pot the mushrooms and the chicken. And since I'm not doing any meat with this, I'm just going to put the mushrooms in with the onions and have them add their flavor to the gravy. Once the butter's melted, I'm going to add in the onions. I'm going to cook the onions for a while, and then I'm going to add the mushrooms because the mushrooms release a lot of water, and I don't want the onions to end up waterlogged and unable to cook. I'm also going to add salt. Okay, and do that. About ½ a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt. It helps bring the water out of the food that you're trying to cook. This is what it looks like after about 2 minutes of cooking. It's been another 5 minutes. The onions are looking translucent, so I'm going to add in the mushrooms. And I'm going to add some more salt on top to help draw the water out of the mushrooms. It's been about 2 or 3 minutes. As you can see, the onions are already getting a lot smaller. And we're going to turn this into a roux. A roux is equal parts fat and flour, so since we put in 8 tablespoons of butter, we're going to put in 8 tablespoons of flour. And we're going to do it one at a time to see how well everything combines. This is after another 4 minutes. If you can see around the edges, that's all water. So that all needs to cook off before we add the flour. The water's boiled off the carrots, and I can easily go through them with a fork. After another few minutes, there's still some liquid around the edge. Some of that is still butter, but a lot of it is water. But the mushrooms have gotten really small. And as soon as I'm done chopping garlic and thyme and sage, I will start adding in flour. I'm going to put the cooked carrots into a dish and set them aside. And I'm going to rinse out this pan because eventually we'll be cooking broth in this pan, chicken broth. And you want the chicken broth to be warm so that you're adding hot broth to the hot pan. Going to add chicken stock to the pot and just keep it on low so it doesn't all evaporate. That was about 3 cups of chicken stock. We'll see if we need more. I'm going to start adding in 8 tablespoons of flour a little bit at a time. And the flour needs to cook off its flour flavor. If you think paste is made with flour and water, and you don't want your food to taste like paste, so you want to cook off that flavor. Now all the flour's been absorbed, and it's started to look a little bit like a ball of Play-Doh. Now I'm going to add in the garlic and herbs. Garlic is cut really small, so if you add it in earlier, it can burn. So you want to add our garlic in as late into the process as you can. And now we start adding in the stock. The roux, the mixture of flour and fat, made everything in the pan really thick, and we're going to do a little bit of stock at a time to loosen it up so that until it gets to the thickness that we want it to be. In total, I used 3.5 to 4 cups of stock. The beans are done in the Instant Pot. I'm going to add the carrots, peas, and beans to the gravy and slowly start mixing it together. Here's my version of a chicken pot pie, and I have a potato in the corner.